There are rooms that hold music differently from other rooms, not because of acoustics, not because of the specific properties of the walls, or the ceiling height, or the distance between the stage and the back wall. Because of what has happened in them, because of who has been in them, and what they did there, and what the room absorbed from the doing of it. A room where music has been played with genuine feeling for many years develops a quality that cannot be designed or installed. It can only be accumulated, slowly, through the specific act of people caring about what they are doing in the space they are doing it in. The club on Valencia Street in San Francisco had that quality. It was not a famous club. It was not the kind of place that appeared in music publications or attracted the attention of critics or booking agents from larger venues. It was a room with a low ceiling and approximately 60 seats and a small stage at the far end and a bar along one wall that served good whiskey and indifferent food and was run by a woman named Grace Chen, who had owned it for 22 years and who understood that the club's value was not in its capacity or its visibility, but in its specific atmosphere, the specific quality of a room where music was taken seriously by the people who played it and by the people who came to hear it. On a Thursday night in November 1991, the room was approximately half full. This was not unusual for a Thursday. The weekend crowds were different, larger, noisier, more interested in the experience of being out than in the specific music being produced. Thursday was the serious night. The people who came on Thursday came to listen. Walter Hendricks was at the piano. Walter was 71 years old in November 1991. He had been playing piano professionally since he was 1952 years, of the specific discipline of a working jazz musician, the accumulated knowledge of a person who has spent more than half a century developing a relationship with an instrument and with the music that instrument can produce. He had recorded 4 albums in the 1960s, during a period when his name was known in certain circles, when critics used words like distinctive and mature and underappreciated about his work. The 1970s had been more difficult. The 1980s had been more difficult still. The music business had changed in ways that left little room for the specific kind of pianist. Walter Hendricks was not a virtuoso in the showy sense, not a crowd pleaser in the obvious sense, but a person who played with the specific quality that people who knew jazz called deep. The playing was interior, patient, unhurried. It made its way to you rather than coming at you. It required listening rather than simply hearing. By 1991, Walter was playing Thursday nights at the club on Valencia Street and occasional weekends elsewhere, and giving lessons on Tuesday and Wednesday afternoons to students who ranged from genuinely talented to genuinely hopeful, and this was the life. He was not bitter about it. Bitterness requires the belief that something has been taken from you, and Walter did not believe that. He had been given the music. What the music business had or had not done with him was a separate matter from what the music itself had given him, which was everything. But he was tired. Not physically tired, though at 71, the physical tiredness was also present. Tired in the specific way of a person who has been doing a thing with great care for a very long time and who has begun to wonder, in the quiet hours after performances, whether the caring matters in the way it once seemed to matter. The club was half full on that Thursday in November. The people who were there were doing what people in half-full rooms often do, talking to each other at a volume calibrated to the ambient sound of a bar, rather than to the specific volume of a jazz pianist performing 15 feet away. Walter could see them from the piano. He had been seeing this from the piano for many years. He played, and some of them heard him, and some of them did not, and both things were true simultaneously, and he had learned to hold both. He was 3 songs into the first set when the door opened. He did not look up from the piano immediately. The door opened often during the first set, people arriving late, people stopping in for a drink and discovering there was music, people who had intended to be somewhere else and ended up here by the specific accident of a Thursday evening in November. But something made him look up. The man who came in was heavy-set, medium height, wearing a plain jacket and a dark shirt. He came in without ceremony, not looking around the room with the self-conscious awareness of a person who expects to be recognized, not scanning for a good seat or a friend or a reason to stay. He came in the way people come into a room when they are not performing their arrival. He found a table in the far corner, the corner farthest from the door and closest to the stage but off to the side, in the shadow of the room's low ceiling. He sat down. He looked at the stage. He looked at Walter Hendricks. Walter looked back. He was in the middle of a song, the middle of a phrase, actually, the middle of a specific sequence of notes that required his full attention, and he looked back at the piano and continued. But he had seen the expression on the man's face in that brief exchange of glances. He had been performing for 52 years. He had seen many expressions on many faces, in many rooms. He knew the difference between someone who was looking at him because he was on the stage and therefore the appropriate object of attention, and someone who was looking at him because they were listening. The man in the corner was listening, not hearing listening. The specific active quality of someone who is directing their attention at a thing with the full apparatus of their comprehension, not just their sense organs. The expression of someone who has encountered something they want to receive completely. Walter played the song through to the end. He moved to the next song. He did not look at the corner again immediately, but he was aware of the corner in the way that performers are aware of specific presences in a room, the specific gravitational pull of a person who is fully in the room with what you are doing. He played differently that night. He could not have said, in the moment, what the difference was. He could only notice that it was there. A quality in the playing that had not been present in the previous weeks. A quality that arrived in the specific context of having a listener. Not an audience, a listener. One person, in a corner, directing their full attention at what he was doing. The people at the other tables continued their conversations. Some of them drifted toward listening as the set progressed. The specific drift that sometimes happens in a room where music is being played with unusual care, the conversations becoming quieter, the attention turning incrementally toward the stage. But the man in the corner was there from the first note, and Walter could feel it, and it changed the night. He played for 2 hours. Between songs, he did not speak much. A few words about the titles, occasionally the names of the composers, the minimal acknowledgement of the room that the setting required. He played, and the man in the corner listened. During the break between the first and second sets, Grace Chen brought the man a drink, and they exchanged a few words. Walter watched this from the side of the stage where he was standing with water and the quiet of the break. Grace Chen came to him after. She said, he asked if he could stay for the second set. Walter said, of course. He stayed. At the end of the second set, at the end of the final song, a version of Autumn Leaves that Walter had been playing for 40 years and that had never sounded quite the way it sounded that night. Slower than usual, more interior, reaching somewhere that the standard tempo did not always reach. Walter stood from the piano bench. The man in the corner was already standing. He began to applaud. 60 people in a room will sometimes applaud at different volumes. The applause of one person who is genuinely moved by something they have heard can, in certain rooms at certain moments, be more present than the applause of 60 people going through the motions of appreciation. This was one of those moments. The rest of the room heard the applause and joined it. The specific social mechanism of a crowd following the cue of someone who has done the thing first and done it with conviction. But Walter was looking at the corner, and what he saw in the corner was a man who had been there for 2 hours, and who was standing, and who was applauding with the full force of something genuinely felt. The other applause faded. The man in the corner continued for a moment longer. Then he sat down. Walter came to the corner. He had not planned to. He was not in the habit of going to tables after performances. The specific exhaustion of a 2-hour set left him with little appetite for the social requirements of post-performance interaction. But he went to the corner. He said, "Thank you for staying." The man looked at him. He said, "I wasn't planning to stop in tonight. I was walking by and I heard the piano through the door, and I came in." Walter nodded. He said, I'm glad you did. The man said, You play like you mean it. Not everyone does. Walter looked at him for a moment. He said, You listen like you mean it. Not everyone does either. The man smiled. It was the specific smile of someone hearing something true said directly. They talked for perhaps 20 minutes about the music, about the specific songs Walter had played, about what it meant to play something for 40 years and still find new things in it. The man asked questions that demonstrated he had been listening, not just hearing, but listening, tracking the specific choices Walter had made, the places where the playing had gone somewhere unexpected. At some point, Walter realized he did not know the man's name. He had been talking to him for 20 minutes about music and he did not know his name. He asked. The man told him. Walter did not react. He received the name with the same equanimity he had received everything else from this person that evening, directly, without performance. He nodded. He said, I didn't know you played jazz. The man laughed. He said, I don't. I just listen. They shook hands. The man left. Walter sat in the corner for a while after. Grace Chen brought him a drink without being asked. She sat across from him for a moment. She said good night. He said, yes. He meant it in the specific way that yes sometimes means more than yes. Yes, it was a good night. Yes, something happened tonight that does not happen every night. Yes, I know what that was, and I am sitting with it, and I am grateful for it. 3 months later, Walter Hendricks went into the studio and recorded what would become the 5th album of his career and, by any serious critical assessment, the best. It was released on a small independent label in 1992 and received, over the following years, the kind of attention that good things receive when the right people find them. Slow, cumulative, the attention of listeners rather than the attention of the music business. The liner notes of the album were brief. Walter was not a man who used many words when fewer would serve. But there was one line at the end that no one who read it knew how to account for, except Grace Chen, and except the man himself, if he ever saw it, which he may or may not have. The line said, "To the man in the corner who listened." That was all. Walter Hendricks played until he was 78 years old, when the arthritis in his hands made it impossible to continue. He gave his last performance at the club on Valencia Street, the same club, still run by Grace Chen, still with the low ceiling and approximately 60 seats, and the small stage at the far end. He played for 2 hours, the same length as the Thursday night in November 1991, and at the end of the 2 hours he stood from the piano bench, and the room gave him what the room had to give. He died in 2004, at 84 years old, in San Francisco, in the city where he had spent most of his working life. Grace Chen was at the club the day she heard the news about Robin Williams in August 2014. She was doing the afternoon preparation that clubs of that kind require before an evening service. She sat down when she heard it and she thought about the Thursday night in November 1991. She thought about what she had seen from the bar that night, a heavy-set man in a plain jacket in the far corner, sitting very still, listening to an old man play the piano for 2 hours. She thought about what Walter had said to her afterward, not the words, but the quality of the silence that preceded them, the specific silence of a person who has been somewhere real for 2 hours and is still partly there. She thought about the liner notes, "To the man in the corner who listened." She did not cry. She was not a person who cried easily, but she sat for a long time in the club on Valencia Street, in the specific late afternoon light that came through the windows at that hour, in the room that had held the Thursday night in November 1991, and she sat with what the room was holding. The music had been real. The listening had been real. The album existed because of the night, and the night existed because a man walking by on Valencia Street heard something through a door and came in. That is the whole of it. That is everything. There is something particular about the listener in a room where music is being played. The listener is not passive. Listening is one of the most active things a person can do. It requires the full deployment of attention, the willingness to receive something without immediately translating it into something else, the capacity to stay with what is being given rather than reaching past it toward something more familiar or more comfortable. Walter Hendricks had spent 52 years learning what genuine listening felt like from the stage. He knew the difference between an audience that was present and an audience that was there. He knew what it felt like to play for a room that was listening, and what it felt like to play for a room that was hearing. The distinction was not subtle. It was the difference between playing into something and playing into nothing. The difference between music that reaches somewhere and music that dissipates in the air. That Thursday night in November, something reached somewhere. He played differently. Not technically differently, the notes were the same notes. The harmonic choices were the choices he had made across decades of playing these songs. But the playing had a quality that his students would have been unable to name, and that experienced listeners would have recognized immediately. The quality of music that is being given rather than performed. The specific vulnerability of someone who has stopped protecting themselves from what they are doing and is doing it completely. This happens rarely in Walter's experience. It happens most often when the room is right, when the specific conditions of listener and performer align in the way that they sometimes align, unpredictably, without warning. On a Thursday night in November, when the room is half full, and a man in a plain jacket comes in from the street and sits in the corner and listens. Walter did not know, when he played the Autumn Leaves version that closed the second set, that he was playing the version he would try to find again in the studio 3 months later. He did not know, when he played it, that he was playing it differently from every previous version, that the tempo was slower, that there was something in the middle register that he had never done before, that the ending was arriving from somewhere he had not visited before. He knew only that he was playing it, and that the man in the corner was listening. Grace Chen had seen many things in 22 years of running the club on Valencia Street. She had seen performers at the height of their powers, and performers past their powers, and performers who had never quite reached their powers. And she had seen the specific combination of music and room and night that produced something beyond what any of those categories could account for. She had learned to recognize it when it was happening, the specific quality of a room that has been taken to a different level by the interaction between what is being played and who is receiving it. She recognized it on that Thursday night. She watched from the bar. She watched Walter play, which she had done many times, and she watched the man in the corner listen, which she had done with many people, and she understood that what was happening between them was the thing that the room had been built for. Not literally, the room had been built to serve drinks and present music in a functional space, but in the sense that matters, the room existed for this, for the specific encounter between a musician who plays with genuine care and a listener who receives with genuine attention. She brought the man a drink during the break and they talked for a few minutes, and when she returned to the bar she was carrying what he had given her in those few minutes without knowing he had given her anything. The knowledge that he had walked by on Valencia Street and heard the piano through the door and come in, that he had not planned this, that the music had reached the street and pulled him in. She thought about that for a long time afterward. The music reaching the street, the specific physics of it, the sound moving through the walls and the door and into the November night air of Valencia Street, where a man was walking and the man hearing it and stopping and coming in. The music had done that. Walter had done that. 52 years of playing like he meant it, accumulated in the specific quality of sound that reached the street on a Thursday night and brought a listener in from the cold. She thought about this when Walter told her about the album. She thought about it when the album was released, and she read the liner notes, and she found the line at the end. To the man in the corner who listened. She thought about it in August 2014, sitting in the club in the late afternoon light after hearing the news. She thought, the music was real, and the listening was real, and the album existed because of both. Walter Hendricks had needed, in November 1991, to be heard, not in the sense of recognition or career advancement or critical attention. He had largely stopped expecting any of those things. He needed to be heard in the specific sense that all artists need to be heard at some point in the long middle of their working lives, genuinely, carefully, with full attention, by someone who was capable of receiving what was being given. That need was met by a man in a plain jacket who walked by on Valencia Street and heard something through a door and came in. He sat in the corner for 2 hours. He listened. He gave Walter Hendricks the audience that produced the best work of Walter Hendricks's life. He never knew he did it. That is the whole of it. That is the specific beauty of it. The not knowing, the walking by, the hearing, the coming in, the sitting, the listening, the standing to applaud, the 20 minutes of conversation about music, the handshake, the leaving. None of it was designed. None of it was planned. None of it was an act of generosity in the deliberate sense, a decision to give someone something. It was simply what happened when a person, with the capacity to listen, walked into a room where something worth listening to was being played. The world has many rooms where things worth listening to are being played. It has fewer people with the capacity to truly listen to them. On a Thursday night in November 1991, on Valencia Street in San Francisco, both were present simultaneously. And a fifth album was made, and a line was written in the liner notes. And the music was real.